Think about all the different conflicts and all the different controversial topics in the world. There's one thing that no matter where you go, somebody has an opinion about. And that's the answer to the question, does God exist? For thousands of years, this is a topic that's been debated and talked about by some of the most academic intellectuals in the world. And today it's still talked about. You see debates like Ken Ham and Bill Nye and so on and so forth, and it's a big topic. But I would say the facts remain that when you take intellectual evidence and science, the existence for God is much more plausible than the inexistence of God. A little bit about me before I get too far. My name is Kasper. I'm 26. I'm a junior here at UT. I'm a Christian, but I wasn't always. I was raised a little differently, and I've only recently become a Christian. But I became that by studying the evidence, reaching out to people who knew a lot more than me to learn from them, because this is a really big topic. Some of the people that I've met and that I've learned from, and that you'll be seeing me quote later on, are William Lane Craig, John Lennox, Lee Strobel, some of the most well-known evangelical apologetic teachers in the world. You won't see anything fancy in my presentation. I'm not going to have any graphs, or any big pretty pictures, or any graphic art. This is meant to be thought-provoking. This is not meant to be something that you look at and say, ooh, how pretty. I want you to think in your head the information that I give you, if it makes sense or not. If it doesn't, that's okay. Ask questions. If it does, that's okay too. This is a really relevant topic to us here in Knoxville because we're in the Bible Belt, right? Everywhere you go, there's God. On every street corner, there's a church. According to KnoxvilleTennessee.org, over 450 churches alone in Knoxville of all different kinds of denominations. And for my presentation, I'm going to elaborate a little bit on, there it is, a little bit on three of the main topics: universal creation, biological creation, and then the subject of morality. As far as history goes, I want to make it known that there's going to be history throughout the presentation, so it's not going to have its own section. But if you have any questions about the history of atheism or theism or God or anything like that, the history of it, I'll be glad to answer any questions at the end. Albert Einstein said, the only thing incomprehensible about the universe is that we can comprehend it. I would agree. The universe is big, we are small. So to think that we can actually comprehend anything about this huge universe, which we can, is pretty impressive. One of the things that we can comprehend, and one of the models that modern scientists have come up with for the creation of the universe, is the Big Bang Theory. More or less, the Big Bang Theory says about 14 billion years ago, there was a large explosion, an expansion of matter and energy. And in only a few moments, all of the matter and energy in the entire universe was created. That's pretty impressive. But I would say that this does not contradict theism. In fact, whenever I think of something like the Genesis account, for example, and I read the very first verse where it says, God created the heavens and the earth. If God is who he says he is, and if he is as we define him to be, I kind of imagine that he would create the universe similar to the Big Bang, very powerfully, and in only a few moments, because he is God. A couple of things though. The Big Bang, without a creator, without a God to elaborate, the Big Bang doesn't really work. For example, modern science, not even modern, but the first law of thermodynamics has been around for a while. It says that matter and energy cannot be created nor destroyed, and I would add, under natural circumstances. So when you go back to the original Big Bang, the actual explosion of that matter and energy, where did it come from? If it cannot be created or destroyed, where did it come from? I would say that under natural circumstances, this is true. But God is not natural, he's supernatural. The second one, Newton's third law of motion, a lot of us probably pretty familiar with it. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Think about how powerful the Big Bang would have been. 14 billion years ago, the entire universe, not just our planet, not just our solar system or our galaxy, the entire universe is created. Now, for an equal and opposite reaction, what would that have been? As the universe expands and creates itself, without a creator, what would that have been? Well, I would argue by the definition of who God is, he is the equal and opposite reaction. That's what a lot of theists would say. But you have guys like Stephen Hawking, who is one of the world's most well-known atheists. He's a mathematician at the University of Cambridge. He says because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. I don't really know how that makes sense. I know by all means Stephen Hawking is a brilliant guy, but because there's gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. That doesn't really compute. John Lennox, though, who's a mathematician at the University of Oxford, so he's one-upped him in one way. He says, if I say X creates X, I presuppose the existence of X in order to account for the existence of X. To presuppose the existence of the universe to account for its existence is logically incoherent. Or, put simply, from nothing, nothing comes, or no thing can do anything. A simple way of putting it is, nothing is in my hand. Will something ever be there unless I put it there? No, right? We would all agree on that, I would assume. Nothing will be there. Nothing's just going to automatically create itself from nothing, like Stephen Hawking said. So, to me, this argument's invalid, and John Lennox definitely elaborates on it. Another example is what William Paley said. He's a Christian theologist from the 1700s, 17 to 1800s. He wrote a book called Natural Theology in 1802. In his book, he used the analogy of a watchmaker. He says, if you look at a watch, you see how complex it is, how many different things go in the making of a watch, right? And if I were to just randomly find a watch on the side of the road and pick it up, I wouldn't look at it and go, this watch came from nowhere. You know that because the watch is so complex, somebody had to make that watch. There was a watchmaker. Now think about the risk that your watch sits on. Your body, the earth, the universe. A much more complex watch. And we're just going to throw away that there's a watchmaker just because it's vastly more complex and intricate. That doesn't make any sense to me. Our logic says things that are super complex, like a watch, need a watchmaker. And the atheist biological evolutionist, Richard Dawkins, he has said that, in his book, The God Delusion, he said that if God creates the universe, who created God? That's a pretty relative question. I would say it's legitimate. But I would say, first of all, as a theist, I would say God is not created, he's eternal. And as a Christian, I would back that up with New Testament scripture. But further, I would reverse the question and say, if you believe, as a biological evolutionist, that the universe created you, who created the universe? So even Richard Dawkins, brilliant as he is, there's still flaws, it seems like. My favorite argument with universal creation is the fine-tuning of the universe, specifically to support life. When you think about all the random processes that had to happen perfectly in order for life to exist here on Earth. I love what Robin Collins says. He's the philosophy chair at Messiah College in Pennsylvania. He says, let's say you were in space and were going to throw a dart at random towards the Earth. It would be like successfully hitting a bullseye that's 1/1,000,000,000 of an inch in diameter. That's less than the size of a solitary atom. Basically what he's saying is, it's very unlikely that things would work out just perfectly for life to be created at random, as Richard Dawkins and Stephen Hawking have suggested. everything about the universe had to be exact. Everything from the distance we are to the sun, to atmospheric pressures, even to gravity. If gravity were changed by 1/10000000th of a gram heavier or lighter, there's no stars, no planets, no life, right? But on the topic of life, Richard Dawkins said this: the fact that life evolved out of literally nothing, some 10 billion years after the universe evolved, literally out of nothing, is a fact so staggering that I would be mad to attempt words to do it justice. Well, I would agree he sounds kind of mad. We've already talked about how something can't come from nothing. But the fact that he thinks life came from nothing doesn't make any sense. In fact, we can use something that science has proven, such as protein. Protein only exists in things that are already living. So that would beg the question, where did the original life form come from? Well, some atheists would say that the original life form came from the mixture of two non-living entities. A really simple and maybe condescending way of putting it is if I mix this chair with Jacob's hat, maybe I'll get life. That doesn't make any sense. And to think that any atheist or anybody would think that is completely unreasonable. Other atheists think that maybe some bacteria from some comets found its way to Earth somehow. Several billion years ago and evolved into life as we know it today. But even then, where did that original bacteria come from? Life had to come from somewhere. And these answers that atheists are giving are not good enough. I would like to point out something Charles Darwin said. Charles Darwin is the godfather of modern evolution. And he said this in his book, The Descent of Man. If men were reared under precisely the same conditions as hive bees, there can hardly be a doubt that our unmarried females would, like the worker bees, think it a sacred duty to kill their brothers and mothers would strive to kill their fertile daughters, and no one would think of interfering. So think about it. If evolution is real, right, and if Richard Dawkins is right, we all evolved under the exact same conditions as the hive bees, kind of like Charles Darwin said. But why didn't we evolve the same way? Why don't we think it's okay for us to kill our unmarried brothers or our fertile daughters? Clearly, something is inconsistent with the argument of evolution. And just as a side note, a lot of people don't know this about Charles Darwin. It's said that towards the end of his life, he actually denounced his belief in evolution and became a Christian. If you have any questions about that, I'll be glad to answer afterwards. That's just a really interesting thought. Keep in mind that human life is by far the most complex thing in the world, right? It's not just a system of random things like the nervous system and your cardiorespiratory system. There's a lot of other things that separate us from animals. We seek logical rationality. We understand truths like 2 + 2 is 4. We have ideas, we have compassion, we have emotion. And my third topic that I'm going to talk about is we have morality. Morality is basically the understanding of what is right and wrong. All right? What is right and wrong? Well, we need something to define what right and wrong is. And I think I'll use a really simple example. Why do we think that murder is bad? Why do we think that a father who sacrifices his life to save his children is good? According to natural selection, which leads to evolution, it would say that we're living strictly to survive and pass on our genes. No other reason, no other purpose. We are here strictly to survive and pass on our genes and reproduce. So what's the need for any morality? Why would I care about all of the topics that we've discussed over the last couple of weeks? Why would I care about saving the whales? Why would I care about raising taxes? Why would I care about Sex Week or even about Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame? The subject of morality is the reason why we do care. Even though those things don't really affect me, it'll never affect me if Pete Rose never gets in the Hall of Fame. But something about that says, that's not fair. That's not right. Something about Tillicum, the killer whale that we've heard about, being treated the way he is, doesn't sound right. And it makes me, and a lot of people, want to actually do something about it. But it doesn't affect me, so why should I care? Because there are morals that do exist. There is a right and wrong. And God defines that as the highest good by his definition. Now, the biggest opposition for this argument is the problem of evil. Evil exists, which I agree, evil does exist. And people say, well, if God is all loving, he should rid the world of all evil and all suffering. Well, I would debate that and say, because God is all loving, he allows us free will instead of forcing us to do certain things. Now, don't get me wrong, something like the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary, we all know about that. Several children were killed. That was evil. That was bad. Doesn't affect me personally, but we all agree, I'm sure, that that was not a good thing. But it would only be evil, God would only be evil, or it would only be a reasonable argument if that evil went unjustified. Because by his definition, God is love, but God also seeks justification. So that's the only peace we have in knowing that evil does exist, is that a God of justification also exists. In a debate with Sam Harris, William Lane Craig, my favorite theist and theological debater, philosopher, he's debated several atheists, including Sean Carroll most recently back in February, I believe it was February or March. He's known for having never really lost a debate as a Christian, which is kind of funny, because you'd think that Christians would lose debates against atheists. Like the Ken Ham and Bill Nye debate, I would agree Bill Nye probably won that debate. But in his debate with Sam Harris, William Lane Craig says, if God does not exist, then what basis remains for the existence of objective moral values? In particular, why think that human beings would have objective moral worth? On the atheistic view, human beings are just accidental byproducts of nature, which have evolved relatively recently on an infinitesimal speck of dust called the planet Earth, and which are doomed to perish individually and collectively in a relatively short time. To break that down, what Dr. Craig is saying, if there's no moral values, if there's no point, then what are we living for? Why do we care? We're going to die soon anyway. We all know that. We're going to die. So what do I care if the orcas are saved? Or what do I care if Sex Week happens? Even if it's a good thing, it doesn't affect me. William Lane Craig won that debate, by the way. So, what does this mean now? Well, I would use a Christian scripture that we can all apply, whether you're a Christian or not. 1 Peter 3:15 says, always be prepared to give a defense of the hope that lies within you. I don't care if you're Muslim, Hindu, atheist, whatever you believe, don't believe it blindly. Seek out the evidence. This is a very serious topic. And whenever you really come to an answer that you're really convicted by, it could change the way you live. It could change the way I live. One last quote, and I'll be done. Lee Strobel, who is an author, he graduated from Yale Law School, and he's a former atheist turned Christian, as he wrote the book, The Case for Christ, which I would, as a side topic, highly recommend. But he says, for me it makes sense to start with a clean slate and say, where does the evidence point? Does it point purely towards a naturalistic process for the creation of the universe, for the creation of life, for the creation of consciousness, and so forth? Or does it point to an intelligent designer behind it? I believe an objective analysis of that data shows the evidence points much more powerfully towards the explanation that there is an intelligent designer. Any questions?
Where do you start with the questions on the top? I mean, there is always in the argument for you, your side versus, I guess, Hawking's side